Greetings, welcome back to Computer Science Principles, Unit 4, Variables, Conditionals, and Functions. We're on functions now with Lesson 9, Explore and Investigate. It's all combined in one. No warm-up for today. We'll go straight on to the activity where we start going to code.org, Level 2, Lesson 9. Okay, we're going to Code Studio. We're going to take a look at the code there. So, meet me over there, pause. We need to get here so you can kind of follow along. I'm going to run the program. We're going to look at the code first, and then we're going to run the program. But if you look at it, it's just a bunch of console logs, and I've already ran it, where it's singing the lyrics of the song. But then it has these two lines of code that are green that say sing chorus, and then we have verse 2. It tells us to add some of those lines again, and then it does the bridge, and then wants us to do the chorus one more time. And you see here we have this function, right? That's what we're working on, function, that's console logs these three lines. So when we run this, it's going to take us to the top. It's going to go through these lines. When it gets to the chorus, notice how it jumped down here. And then it's running it twice, because he says it twice. And then we go back to the top. It goes to the verses. Now if we add those lines, I'm going to stop it. If we take these two lines and put them here, if you notice, if we run it again, it'll basically just run all these lines of code wherever we see this. And that's pretty much the gist of a function, right? And we'll kind of go into a little bit of details how this all works. But this is a function, and when you call it, it executes all the lines of code in it. So we'll watch this video, kind of explains a little bit more, and then we'll go through level 4 and 5 before we wrap up.
One of the most important concepts in computer science is how to define new commands, how to add your own words to a computer language. Most computer languages have only about 100 words or commands, and really the art and magic is in defining your own new words out of these building blocks. We do this all the time in sports. For example, in basketball, you start by learning how to dribble, how to do a layup, how to rebound. Once you've learned these really basic moves, you learn new moves and put together these building blocks, like a pick and roll or a give and go. And you can then go from there to do more complex plays. And once you learn that play and give it a name, everybody on the team knows how to do it. Similarly, once you've taught a computer how to do an action once using these sequence of commands, you can make up your own name for that action, so it's easy to repeat it later. When you define your own command and give it a name, that's called a function.
There are two steps to using functions in JavaScript. First, we need to define our function, and then we need to call it. When you define a new function, you are simply giving a single name to a set of actions you want the computer to perform. To call a function, you just type the name of the function, followed by parentheses. This is actually telling the computer to perform or execute the set of actions you gave a name to. You've already been calling functions when you use the turtle commands. The only difference is that someone else defined them for you. Notice in AppLab, the toolbox now has a tab called Functions. There are two blocks in there, one for defining a new function and one for calling a function. Let's make a function that moves the turtle forward twice. We'll call it Move Twice. Drag a new function block out and type in the name you want to give the function. Now, add the code that you want to run when the function is called. We'll add two move forward commands and then run our program. Hey, we defined a function, but nothing happened. The reason is we forgot step 2. We need to call the function.
This is a critical concept when you're going through this. Just because you have the code there, it won't execute. And this is also a huge piece of functionality of it, right? You don't want it to execute always right away, right? So there's two reasons for functions. We'll kind of go into them now. It's a good time. The first one is it stores the code, right? So you don't have to do move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward. You don't have to write that, especially if there's more lines. I have functions with hundreds of lines of code in them. So with this, you could just call that function and it'll execute all those lines of code. That's number one. Number two is it stores the code until you actually want it to happen. So say a click, I can click and then all of these lines of code will execute. Or if this happens, then run all these code, right? It gives you the ability to actually store it for later use and at the same time make it easy for you to just execute something over and over again. But again, you still have to call it whenever you want to execute it. Otherwise, again, the whole point of it is to store it and wait there until you call it.
To call the function, we drag out the other block in the Functions tab and add in the name of our function. Now that we have both defined and called our function, the code will actually run and the turtle will move. Notice that if I also call the function before its definition, it still works. It just calls the function twice. Defining a function simply gives a name to a block of code without actually running it. The definition can actually be anywhere in your program. The rest of the code will execute line by line, just as before. Calling a function executes the lines of code inside the function, and afterwards, the program returns to where it left off when the function call was made. The fact that the function definition can be placed anywhere means that your code can get messy and really hard to read. So we typically put our function definitions at the end of our programs to help keep things organized. In JavaScript, we call them functions, but the generic term is procedure. All programming languages have a way to define and use new procedures, and it's just another example of how computer scientists use abstraction to solve problems. Once you've written a procedure or function that you know works as intended, you can call the function as often as you wish without worrying about the details or problems you had to solve to get it working. And in defining a function to perform a certain task, you've essentially increased the capabilities of the programming language and can now use that function on its own or as a part of even more complex actions. You can also see why it's important to give your function a meaningful and descriptive name. If you called it something like do stuff, it would be unclear what the function was supposed to do and make it hard to use in your own code. By referencing a large and complex block of code by a single name, it makes it much easier to understand what a program is doing by reading the code, and also easier to locate and fix problems or errors.
All right, so with that, we're going to move on to level 4 and 5, and then we'll wrap up. And we mentioned a few of the common errors when you're debugging. A lot of times you'll see, and if nothing happens, right, if your function's not executing, it's most likely because you didn't call it. All right, so let's head on over to 4. We're going to read through the program, predict how it will run, and then talk about it. So update screen, what does it do? And then you're going to modify it so the end game is greater than 15 or less than -10, and make it display the word clicks after the count as you play the game. So you'll put clicks here, which is what we've been doing with a lot of the variable stuff. So let's go ahead and minimize this so we can see what it does. Basically, when you click the up button, it's going to do the count and then the update screen. You'll notice that normally this is where the set screen would go, right? You would set the screen. So let's look down here and yep, sure enough, right? Set text is right there. So it's going to update it with whatever the count is, whatever you've updated the count to. That's why it's important to have that global variable up there. But then it's also giving you the ability to, hey, if I get to either these numbers, so you remember we're going to easily change these to 15 and 10. You're going to change them. But if you run it, you can see, oh, it's going so slow. There we go. All right, so don't forget to bump up your speed to rabbit. And then you up, you can go down, and if you get to 10, congratulations, you won. So go ahead and play around with this. Change this to 15 and -10. And then you should be able to add, concatenate counts to this as well. That's your goal. So go ahead and pause. All right, welcome back. Let's move on to number 5. Hopefully you got all that working. And this is lemon CSAP. We worked on this before. Repeated blocks of code, so we're going to try to get stuff repeated with it. Remember, the point was when you're hovering over lemon, you're good. At lime, it's no good. So we need to replace the repeated blocks of code with a single function, update screen. So we're going to go through, play button, does all of this, but this just gets us started. So lemon mouse over, it's going to check all of this and change the lemon size. It's going to set the properties and change everything. So this is the same on both of them, right? They're both going to, whenever we hover over something, it changes both of them. This is only changing the property on the lemon, so it's probably not going to change the thing. Now we can go into parameters and stuff later where you could do most of this all in one function. But for now, score goes up, so that's going to be different. We change the lemon, so that's going to be different. But all of this update, and then moving everything around, if we look at this, again, you move everything around and you update. So all of that's going to go into its own function. So basically, you're going to put one line here, update screen, and then put one line here, update screen, and then all that code is going to go at the bottom. So again, go ahead and try that. Pause. Welcome back. Again, hopefully you got it. So all of this text is now going to be inside of a new function, and you can just create functions by pulling it over. The key is name it, update screen where you want to name it, and then don't forget to call it back there, right? So I'm going to put that back, and then head back on over to this, where we'll wrap up, so we can kind of see this. Larger so you can see it. The update screen, right? We're seeing this a lot where whatever you have that's similar in both of these, you can just put it into this and just call. You still got to call it, but it references it. So again, function is just the group of instructions. The call, function call, which I keep saying call, is where you actually call it by name. Don't forget, you see it has a parentheses at the end of it. That's what actually calls it. Alright, so reflecting on today's lesson about functions, what did you learn? What are you certain about? Go ahead and answer that, and we'll see you next lesson.